the Nicholas Henry paradigms. Now, as we were studying the idea of public interest, it is quite obvious that public interest is not quantifiable. It is more of a qualitative aspect. Plus, public interest cannot be, defined in a specific framework, probably the Western framework for the universal consumption. It cannot be for that, or universal application. It has to be somewhere visualized in a broader aspect of society, culture, and its various other requirements. No doubt, the globalization and public-private partnerships, or the forces of marketization, corporate state that we talk about, global corporatism. So this corporatism is bringing the nations closer, making them more or less similar in terms of their experiences, consumption pattern, behavior, which all the more is creating problems for the public administration. But to an extent, it would say that, okay, more or less the needs are being visualized similarly. So somewhere the nation states are shrinking in their role. The cultural boundaries are also shrinking, or I would say it is becoming more and more converged with the other nations, other cultures. And this may also have positive and negative impacts both. So public interest is not a rational criteria, though it can be served rationally with the use of principles. Now, in this regard, Amartya Sen's view is important, is pertinent. Now, Amartya Sen has somewhere started with the critique of the John Rawls. The John Rawls talks about the theory of justice. Okay. Theory of justice. I hope it is visible. And so when we say Rawls' theory of justice, you have Amartya Sen, who comes with his capabilities approach and entitlement theory. Right? They may seem, it's visible, right? They may seem to be more complicated, but they are not. See, entitlement theory was not propounded by him. This idea came long back, even with the conception of utilitarianism, or even theory of justice to an extent talks about it. Robert Nozick was the person who basically highlighted it. And this was one of the basis of the public choice approach also. When you study the precursor to public choice theory, that is social choice theory, or the principle of equanimity. Robert and Knut Wicksell was a scholar, and that is also known as Wickelsian theory of state. In Wickelsian theory of state, he is basically talking about that the principle of equanimity must be used to distribute the resources between the people or the communities. So they take the example of taxation, and through the taxation they try to prove that the state's taxation or state taxing people must be in consonance with the benefits state is providing. If that is not there, then technically the state is exploiting people, and ultimately such a state would be delegitimized. It will not be needed, may not be accepted. So that is a correct idea. You can see in pandemic how the GST operations are going on, how the income tax rates are going on. Obviously people have amassed wealth and they have somewhere misused the system, but the idea is that like the government today is saying that income tax violations will not be treated as penal violations, and income tax should not have an adversarial attitude towards the people. So somewhere they were trying to modify this attitude, right? So these people started with the same idea. Now entitlement can be very well understood if we just try to understand his theory or his analysis of famine and drought. Famine is, if you know, bhukmari, lack of food, and drought is lack of rainfall. So he analyzes it. He says drought and famine are not same. If government says there were drought years and that because of the drought the food security has suffered, the government is lying, because famine is a consequence of lack of availability of food which was not properly planned by the government. Drought may be natural. So if the famine is there, if bhukmari is there, lack of food is there, food insecurity is there, that is mainly owed to the failure of policy. Whereas drought can be, the Indra Bhagwan can be invoked for the drought, right? So the idea was, he says that okay, somewhere the states have failed to deliver their basic responsibilities, and at the same time the states have believed or made believe people that, or many theories of economics have made believe people that giving them survival package, ensuring them survival is the development or the growth. Now he says this is not growth, this is not development. Ensuring basic means of survival is the duty of this state. It is a moral obligation, it is a legal obligation, it is a constitutional obligation, it is a human rights obligation. So state providing the basic amenities, basic means, in no way justifies the state's benevolent action. State is not philanthropic. It's giving you subsidies, it is giving you doles, it is giving you PDS, it is giving you free rations, it is subsidizing many of the utilities. That is not a moral act of the state. That is an obligation of the state by virtue of being the state, the legitimate control they have, and the collective conscience by which people have accepted. Collective will, लोगों ने उसको collectively accept किया. People have accepted it and accepted its orders, authority, law, procedures, whatever. Given privileges to the state. Fine? So that is the idea where we cannot say that somewhere state has done something extraordinary. Now most of the poverty alleviation programs, okay, most of the livelihood security programs are aimed at what? Providing basic amenity. Now Narega is not development. It is not even growth. It is a survival. So he comes with his idea of entitlements, and that too in the rights-based format, RBA. Rights-based approach. Now rights-based approach says that utilities, things, services must be availed as a right and not necessarily as a philanthropy by the state. So people making hoardings and claiming the politicians claiming their, their role, posing themselves as Masiha, right, demigod. Okay, that is all illogical. It's not one individual who can do it. So it's okay. So let's not get into that politics. So rights-based approach. Okay, that is why we have right to education, we have Food Security Act or right to food, right to environment, right to sanitation, potable water, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, and likewise. So this rights-based approach basically creates the idea of entitlement. Right? It has its own limitations, no doubt. And that is his concept of the welfare economics that he talks about, develops a formula, right? We are not concerned with the formula. And then he says that once the basic entitlements are fulfilled, once technically the right to live is satisfied, right? Right to living and right to live, both, is satisfied, then the capabilities approach should be invoked. What is capabilities approach? The capabilities approach says that every individual must be developed to the fullest of its capabilities, but that does not mean it is the state's sole responsibility to develop the capability. The state's responsibility is to bring him to the level of survival and create the atmosphere, create the environment in which this person develops his capability. So, logically there should not be inequality. There should be equality of opportunity. There should be freedom of expression, freedom of choice, education, literacy, basic health amenities, human development indicators must evolve, right? And then only the capabilities will be developed. So he says this is now more of an empowerment strategy. And combining these two, entitlement, right to living and right to life, or right to good life, right? And then capabilities approach is obviously a kind of empowerment. So basically his idea is that you cannot just talk about literacy and education and expression and choice, voting rights and all those things unless this is ensured. But this is ensured does not mean it is the end of the road. It does not mean it is the end of your strategy. The strategy will evolve from there. So this is just survival, right? And this is growth and development. Now he has his own notion, no doubt, right? And likewise Gandhian principle, when we talk about anti-development thesis, anti-development approach, counter-development thesis, Wolfgang Escobar and Sachs, right? Or Esman, Montgomery, Pradhan, then Burden. There are a lot of Indian scholars, Pai Patandikar, Shir Sagar, a lot of scholars are there. Then contemporaries like Suvira Jaiswal, or for that matter, that Osmania University professor, is quite popular. His name I'll tell you, right? So, Kancha Ilaiah, right? So these people, now they have brought the anti-development perspective. So Gandhian model or Gandhian principles are truly fitted into the anti-development perspective. Now his idea is also revolving around the similar concept that Sarvodaya, Antodaya, right? So Swaraj, Suraj, Sarvodaya, rise of all, Antodaya, rise of the lowest, the weakest, Swaraj, self-governance, Suraj, good governance. Focus on cooperative societies, trusteeship, self-development, village level development, inversion of power, various concepts Gandhi talks about which aligns with the existing notion of good governance, ethical governance, decentralization of power, and at the same time public interest. So many of these philosophies are not actually defining public interest, but they are developing the principles through which we can evaluate what we are doing is in the public interest or not, or whether we are able to achieve the public interest through what we are doing. Right? So government makes Aadhaar, and Aadhaar has a specific purpose, acceptable. Aadhaar will make things more inclusive, right? Accepted. But to have Aadhaar, the people need to have certain conditions. They have to follow certain conditions, right? Now bringing or using Aadhaar for the services for which it is defined, acceptable. For using Aadhaar for services which are not defined is not acceptable. Now those services may come under optional. But over the time what will happen? If Aadhaar becomes the only criteria for your identity, okay, let's not say citizenship, it is just an identity, social identity, right? For social benefits, but at this say socio-economic benefits, let's say. But over the time what will happen? Because many services will be connected to the Aadhaar only, it will become simple, it will become a kind of mandatory requirement. So if tomorrow the essential services like, let's say like for example banking or filing of income tax returns, or for that matter buying a house, right, owning a property is associated, is like an essential function. Let's say tomorrow it is associated with mandatory with some other function. For example, if you have to open a bank account, you need to have an Aadhaar, link your Aadhaar and PAN with the bank account, and in the bank account your money will come through which you can buy the house. So there are a lot of direct and indirect obligations which the Aadhaar may create. And here comes the grey area. the ethical dilemma, the conflict, the paradox of development, or public interest. That a particular thing designed for the interest of people, for serving the interest of people better, itself becomes the limitation in serving that interest. Not acceptable. Right? So, let us see. So, this public interest debate keeps going on. Right? It doesn't end. But when we study evolution, when we talk about the evolution of public administration, then defining it in terms of public interest is very important. Now, many scholars obviously have tried to capture the essence of public administration, and people like Waldo, who say that one-line definition of public administration is mental paralysis than enlightenment. They sum up the sentiment. Or for that matter, Frederick Mosher, Mosher, he says it's better public administration be not defined at all. Or Waldo's use of the heterodoxy. Right? So I'm just writing it briefly so that you should not confuse. Right? So Waldo uses the word the heterodoxy of public administration or elephantology. Right? Mosher says better not be defined. He also says it's a mental paralysis than enlightenment. Many people have said Pabad is polyglot, speaks multiple languages. And so whether it is heterodoxy, elephantology, or lack of definition, or a polyglot nature, public administration definitely has evolved out of that now. So Wilson's vision, trying to capture the essence of public administration, is very crucial in this aspect to understand that at least there was a cut-off date, there is a cut-off scenario where we can understand that how administration evolves. At least what were the forces, what were the aspirations, and what were the starting events which led to the emergence of public administration as an area of study. We have talked about perspectives so that you can understand it. Right. But globalization and human rights, the concept of localization, decentralization, they have changed this entire debate. Right. But it's okay. So there have been several scholars like Golombiewski and Nicholas Henry who have tried to sum up this sentiment through the concept of their stages of evolution of Pabad. More, you can say, concretely analyzed by Nicholas Henry. Initially starting with a concept of paradigm or 5 paradigms, ultimately ends up in 6 paradigms. Golombiewski uses 4 paradigms. Golombiewski's paradigm start from 1887, right? Whereas Nicholas Henry's paradigms start from 1900. Both start their paradigms from dichotomy. The dichotomy was essential, or the concept of dichotomy was essential in creating an identity for public administration as a subject. The mother discipline was political science, and public administration considered as the foster child of political science. Why? Because once a subject wants to separate, create its identity, right? Obviously, father will not feel good if the child wants to create its own identity. So many scholars obviously were not happy, but the Wilson's idea, Wilson's contention was very clear that the failure of the society owes more to politics than administration. Mind my words, I'm not saying administration than politics, I'm saying more to politics than administration. Why? Because he believes that it is the politics which has polluted the administration. In fact, as per Wilson's analysis, the administration was the torch bearer of public interest, but it has not been allowed to function properly. It has not been allowed to do its task. Right? So, the idea, right, that how do we interpret, how do we succinctly combine the essence of the evolution, right, comes in the paradigm. Paradigm is a conceptual framework, a dominant conceptual framework which could be treated as a scientific development. Why? Because in a particular phase there can be many theoretical contributions, there can be many ideas existing, school of thoughts existing. Which of them is going to dominate, or which of them was dominant, would be treated as paradigm. So paradigm would be like tracing the trajectory, the path of evolution of a subject. That is how the paradigm would be meaning or would be understandable. So the word paradigm obviously was not used by Nicholas Henry initially. It was used by Thomas Kuhn, a scholar related to, plus also Huntington, if you've heard the name. He was also somewhere using this idea, right? And many other scholars have contributed, but technically not Nicholas Henry. Right? So he identifies 6 paradigms. 6 paradigms of study, right? Fine. Visible. First, let us make it, makes it easy for us. So paradigm 1 is politics, administration, dichotomy. Right? Is it visible? Just a second. Right. Dichotomy. This generally will be treated 1900 to 1926. Then you have principles phase. The principles paradigm 2. Now it has 3 phases technically, 1927 to 1937, 1937 to 1947, 1947 to 1950. Why? This is principles phase. This is the era of challenge. Challenge, right? Crisis of identity, era of challenge. This is also known as era of orthodoxy. And this is somewhere known as the phase of redemption, coming back, right? A phase of decision making where the Simon comes, right? So technically This phase, principles emerge, challenge happens, crisis of identity. And this is where it starts moving towards this and this. Right? So this phase can be called as phase of redemption, revival, resurgence to an extent, right? But it is basically the identity crisis. Paradigm 3. Pubad as Paul Science, 1950 to 1970. Pubad as management, paradigm 4. These are overlapping. Right? Also known as, there are various names, we'll talk about it. Right? This generally starts from 1956 to 1970. Certain events trigger it. Paradigm 5. Pubad as technically Pubad or curricular, as Nicholas Henry uses, curricular autonomy. Curricular autonomy, that its discipline, its content is becoming autonomous. Right? Then you have paradigm 5 here. Paradigm 6, sorry. Pubad as governance. This is a very important aspect. Pubad as governance, still evolving. And if you want, we can add our own idea of paradigms. Pubad as good governance, corresponding phase. The governance will subsume good governance, but Pubad as e-governance today is a dominant paradigm. Pubad as new liberal perspective or the new public management model, another paradigm. Right? In fact, this phase can be simply identified as Pubad as bureaucracy, Pubad as organizational perspective. Right? Kindly write it first. Discussions will come. You write it. You must be knowing also many of these things. Paradigm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. Fine. There is another person, Golumbieski, right? The discussion we'll do once we compare. Like 6 paradigms Nicholas Henry talks about, Golumbieski talks about only 4 stages, right? He develops a 2 by 2 matrix, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll talk about it, don't worry, right? But there is another person who has given it more, probably more easily, more comprehensively, the understanding of how, what is the scope of this study of Pubad and how technically it evolved as a subject. How this subject was influenced by society and to an extent how it impacted this society. Now his name is Burrell and Morgan. Right, I'm making, don't please go, don't think about the aesthetics. Right. So Burrell and Morgan's classification, he takes basically 4 quadrants. 1, political, other, organizational, political, organizational, subjective, विजुअल है नहीं है, थोड़ा नीचे करो, subjective, objective. You can also understand this as more normative, empirical, now this classification is given by Burrell and Morgan. Right? In the book Principles of Management, Coons O'Donnell, well, the book written by them, it's quite a good book. You don't need to read that, right? We have read it for you. So Burrell and Morgan, now they gave a classification: political, organizational, subjective, objective. Now they say that this is the entire sphere of the evolution of public administration, and this can help us understand and locate the various theoretical developments, the various practical developments, okay, which will be or which must be studied in the field of public administration. So they say now there is a set of studies which relates to political aspect and more objective, like democracy. So political and objective aspect, which is the area which generally comes as political part, as the study of state, bureaucracy and all this in PubMed, but it is more focused on rationality, objectivity, factual study. I will give you the example, right? Public choice approach. Right? Or when we use Simon's model in public policy. I'm not saying the Simon's model per se is like this, but when we are using in public policy, so area of study of public policy is basically political objective. But when we use, right, theoretically, Waldo's NPA, we become subjective. Right? When we talk about Paul Appleby, we are more talking about normative aspects. When we talk about ethics in governance, right? Or when we talk even about good governance to an extent, we are political and subjective. Many areas which are studied that way. Then we have organizational objective. Most of the theories, rationality, scientific inquiry. So you have Taylor, Fayol, Gulick, major classical, behavioral, major scholars contributing in this aspect are all organizational and objective. Right? Your new public management model. Science, rationality, quantification, efficiency, scientific management, most of them, right? Bureaucracy. Whereas organizational subjective, who are the scholars? Now Waldo can come both the places, but who are the scholars? Let us take human relations management, right? So you have Mayo, you have Foley, then Bernard, fine art of decision making or fine art of executive decision making not only involves structure, legal processes, but a complex morality. The statement used by Bernard talking about functions of his executive. He believes that administrative decision making, okay, has complex morality as its environment. Right? It's not merely a technical exercise. Right? Now this is a classification which gives or helps us understand the wide domain of public administration, how it oscillates between political and organizational, subjective and objective. Gives us a good meaning, right? A more comprehensive understanding of the domain of the subject. So we'll talk about such things, these things, and the paradigms, and to an extent Golumbieski's analysis, right? But meanwhile we'll keep our discussion here because of some technicalities, right? So just go through whatever we have discussed till now. There is a lot of undercurrent, there is a lot of substance, and don't just look for the information that will give that. Most of the information will be available, right? And because several students have asked for that, okay, is there some, yes, there is a lot of content, but a lot of things like we are writing, I'm writing myself, right, or we are writing, and then so I have a bundle, I have created some unique class notes for paper 1 also and 2 also, but 1 would mostly be given. I would just try that, okay, I have access to those notes written by one of the students who got selected and made a kind of PDF of that, right, on his iPad he wrote it. So let me ask and extract it from him, send it and to the office, and then you can have access to that, right. But that would be a request that don't share it beyond yourself, keep it to yourself, right, and it will help you a lot in organizing your ideas, right. You'll get a lot of other content also in that. So the discussions that we'll do somewhere you'll find there, right. So see you then. Thank you so much for today, and my apologies for being a brief session, a short session, but there are some technicalities, right. So in case you have any doubts, you can call the office, right, or we can have, like I told you, we'll have Google Meets, so we can just go for the dots, or we can just have a collection of questions, right, and we can go for that, right. So don't worry, we know the art and science, and probably you are committed enough to learn that, right. So don't worry, we are going to do that, plus you are going to enhance your marks many times, right. So let us see, we'll work on not only enhancing the marks but also improving the presentation that you have been doing till now, helping you understand the questions in a better way, undercurrents, basic premises, that will be more easy, right. See you then. Thank you so much. All the best.